I'm finally making a porn video. No, not that kind. You're about to be woefully disappointed. For those of you who do not know me and are only watching this video because the words Catholic and porn are in the title, my name's Regina Lux. My show with Faith and Reason Studios is Veritas on the Rocks, Catholic Edition. My theme is using logic to shed some light onto topics and encouraging Catholics to do something with the knowledge that I show them, to go forth, if you will. So let's proceed. Most people do not encounter a Christian woman speaking so brazenly about this. My aim with this video is to openly battle this dragon. People are woefully uneducated when it comes to this topic, so while I am not an authority, as I'm not a doctor, I'm still someone who knows a lot and cares a lot. I'm going to speak about the basic facts about how porn affects someone's brain, relationship, and our society. Now, what you need to know from the start is that I am not trying to condemn anyone. I understand addiction. I've seen suffering. I do not want to cause more pain, but lift people up and bring them closer to Jesus Christ and one another. This video is for people who suffer with addiction, as well as those who love them. I will also try to provide some insight to this topic if you have someone else in your life who you're struggling to understand. This is a video geared towards Catholics and will outline some Catholic coping mechanisms. My last video was about the proper Catholic's response to the Netflix movie Cuties. I drew parallels to the various human behaviors which led to this point in our culture, people normalizing the sexualization of children in the open, and the personal moral duty of Catholics to respond in a certain way. After my last video got slightly more traction, as I'm a nobody, so getting that many views was exciting, I had quite a few men reach out to me to confide in me. Catholic men who sought me out to own up to their own past behaviors and thank me for saying what I did because no one else was taking the stand that they needed to witness. I was inspired to make this video after a surge of encounters from men who suffer from porn addiction or who have desensitized themselves to the point that they are hardly fazed by the denial of human dignity in media. I do not tell these individuals that they are disgusting trash for being addicted to porn, because they aren't. They are suffering from a very real sickness, and as children of God, they need help, or they have a very real reality of burning in hell. And I want to make it my duty to reach into this abyss and lift these people out and show others how to. The first issue is that people need to realize that they actually have a problem. Catholics, if you didn't see my previous video where I bring up the desensitization of our spirits and cultures, lost to the normalization of sexual exploitation, watch it after this one. Maybe you, like these other people who reached out to me, will see yourself. The first part is understanding that you have a problem, even if it's not a full-blown porn addiction. If you've been desensitized to the value of others around you, it's still a big problem that harms your soul. I had a friend in my life who denied having such a problem, and when I tried to tell him I was worried about him, he simply denied that there was an issue. He's so desensitized to the value of the human person that he doesn't think anything of making womanizing remarks around a sexual abuse survivor, because he doesn't even realize what he does and says goes against Catholic goodness and charity. His brain chemistry physiologically cannot comprehend it. The first step to healing this wound in you is acknowledging that there's a problem, not making excuses for it. If you disturb someone who is seeking holiness, then there is a very real problem. If you're in a position where you do not know whether or not you've been desensitized, the quickest way to finding out is to go to a good, authentically holy person and show them what you watch and what you say, and they'll let you know. Go watch my last video to get some clues. I'll link it in the description. Some background info about me. I do have a history of educating myself and others on the subject of pornography use, how it affects an individual's brain and life, and its effect on society. I've trudged through scientific journals, interviewed psychologists, interviewed sex workers, and counseled people whose relationships and lives were ruined by pornography. So let's start here. What is porn? It's printed or visual material containing the explicit description or display of sexual organs or activity intended to stimulate erotic rather than aesthetic or emotional feelings. So you guys saying that nude and sex scenes are needed to further a story? You're wrong. Those scenes are intended to stimulate erotic reactions, not emotional ones. This is why dirty TV shows and movies that aren't explicitly porn for porn's sake are still porn. What happens when pornographic material stimulates an erotic reaction? Let's talk about your brain. Watching pornography floods your brain with dopamine. This is the chemical in the reward part of your brain that generally makes you feel good, whether it's by eating great food or having great sex, etc. When porn enters the brain, it triggers the reward centers to start pumping out dopamine, which sets off a cascade of chemicals, including a protein called delta phos B. Delta phos B's regular job is to build new nerve pathways to mentally connect what someone is doing, i.e. consuming porn, to the pleasure he or she feels. Those strong new memories outcompete other pleasure connections in the brain, making it easier and easier to return to porn. That's why some men might choose porn over actual sexual intercourse. Taken from the organization Fight the New Drug, delta phos B has another job, and this is why its nickname is the molecular switch for addiction. If enough delta phos B builds up, it flips a genetic switch, causing lasting changes in the brain that leaves its user more vulnerable to addiction. For teens, the risk is especially high because a teen's reward center in the brain responds 2 times more powerfully than an adult's brain, releasing higher levels of dopamine and produces more delta phos B. Overloaded with dopamine, the brain will try to defend itself by releasing another chemical called CREB. CREB is like the brakes on a runway reward center. It slows the pleasure response. With CREB on board, porn that once excited a person stopped having the same effect. Scientists believe that CREB is partly why consumers have to keep increasing their porn intake to get aroused. That numbed out state is called tolerance, and it's part of any kind of addiction. Guys, this is how child pornography, snuff pornography, and other such fetishes are a thing. The desire for more taboo and harder hitting material is necessary to achieve a sexual high to a desensitized brain. It's why people aren't fazed by nude and sex scenes. Their brains are desensitized. And much like with sex, our brains become desensitized to human suffering as well. People become tolerant of extremely violent things and revel in it, as proof by what our entertainment isn't afraid to show. It's supply and demand. If you weren't upset by movies like Saw, then you're desensitized. Your brain chemistry has been altered from a healthy, normal state. This is also a reason why it's so important to keep children away from sexual or violent materials. You moms, letting your children watch Silence of the Lambs and other such movies, your kids are going to be screwed up. And yeah, it's your fault. You are letting them play violent video games and letting them watch shows with nudity. You are setting them up for failure in their relationships, let alone their being able to demonstrate self-control or genuine understanding of the value of others. Let's talk about addiction. Advances in neuroscience identified addiction as a chronic brain disease with strong genetic, neurodevelopmental, and sociocultural components. Much like how you can become addicted to certain foods, to alcohol and drugs, you can easily become addicted to pornography. In fact, it's really hard not to. That has to do with the dopamine released in the reward center of your brain. And with how we live now, it's easier to access porn than your favorite food. The thing that people also forget about addiction is that it only grows, as I stated before. Druggies need stronger hits in order to get high. The same thing happens with porn, and that's why people will get into disordered sexual porn. Addiction also means that you require something in order to live a normal life. You feel a withdrawal without your addictive substance, especially if you need that hit of dopamine. Essentially, addictive drugs hijack the brain, turning it around and forcing it into the direction it was never meant to go. Instead of encouraging the consumer toward healthy behaviors, drugs lead the consumer into things that aren't healthy at all and can even be dangerous. Porn activates the same parts of our brains that are activated when we give into an addictive substance. According to Fight the New Drug, researchers have found that internet porn and the addictive substances like tobacco have very similar effects on the brain, and they are significantly different from how the brain reacts to healthy, natural pleasures like food or sex. Think about it. When you're munching a snack or enjoying a romantic encounter, eventually your cravings will stop and you'll feel satisfied. Why? Because your brain has a built-in off switch for natural pleasures. Dopamine cells stop firing after repeated consumption of a natural reward. The more hits drug users take, the more dopamine floods their brain and the stronger their urges are to keep using. That's why drug addicts find it so hard to stop once they take that first hit. One hit may turn into many hits, or even a lost weekend. What else has the power to keep pumping dopamine endlessly into your brain? You guessed it, porn. Scientists have long known that sexual interest and performance can be increased simply by introducing something new, like a new sexual position, a toy, or a change of partner. That's because the brain responds to new sexual stimuli by pumping out more and more dopamine, flooding the brain just like a drug would. And new is exactly what internet porn sites provide. An endless stream of fresh erotic images delivered at high speed and vivid color 24/7. Before consumers even start to get bored, they can always give themselves another dopamine boost just by clicking on something different, something more stimulating and hardcore than before. In fact, porn consumption follows a very predictable pattern that's eerily similar to drugs. Over time, excessive levels of pleasure chemicals cause the porn consumer's brain to develop tolerance, just like the brain of a drug user. In the same way that a junkie eventually requires more and more of a drug to get a buzz or even feel normal, regular porn consumers will end up turning to porn more and more often or seeking out more extreme versions to feel excited again. And once the porn habit is established, quitting can even lead to withdrawal symptoms similar to drugs. Or, as St. Augustine said, lust indulged becomes habit, and habit unresisted became necessity. Porn addiction will actually become more satisfying than actual sex with a partner, since porn creates the perfect conditions that trigger the release of the right chemicals to make lasting changes in the brain. A man with a hardcore addiction to porn will choose it over having actual sex with his spouse. Catholic. That right there is a good enough reason to avoid it. So what can one do as a Christian to avoid pornography and be held accountable? There are a few apps that will help with that. One that I'm familiar with is called Covenant Eyes. I believe it blocks potentially pornographic material on sites, which is great. However, something I pointed out to someone I was recently counseling about this is that when you have a coping mechanism taken away and it has the same effect on your brain as a drug, you need to replace it with something else. If you've got a crutch and it's taken from you, you shouldn't expect yourself to be able to run a marathon on one leg. That is where a lot of men seem to lose mercy on themselves. They genuinely don't realize that their brains have been rewired and that they usually started using porn in the first place to feel normal. I'll list some various helpful resources in the description, as I'm not a doctor or anything, but I wanted to make it known that simply downloading Covenant Eyes is not enough to get on the right path. All you've done is deny yourself the thing that made you feel normal. You will likely go into a sort of withdrawal, maybe even end up binging. But let's get into why people will get into porn in the first place. Unfortunately, the age of discovery of porn is younger and younger, considering how easily children can access it. There's also the dilemma of TV shows introducing sexual exploitation to children and teenagers. They will initially be curious, and then they will be desensitized. It's no wonder people watch porn if they watch softcore pornographic shows first. It's a natural step, as your brain was flooded with dopamine and will want harder and harder hits. Parents, this is a really good reason to shield your children from those kinds of shows. I was flabbergasted when I heard about how teenagers were watching pornographic shows. Like, of course we have an epidemic. Our culture thrives on the sexual exploitation of people for the gain of others in positions of power. My last video goes more in depth with this, and my next one will actually go over what you can do as a parent to help prevent your children falling into these sorts of issues. Let's take a step back and talk about other reasons why people might specifically seek out pornography, specifically pornography, as opposed to pornographic TV shows or movies. As we know, dopamine is a key player in the chemical reaction in your brain, triggering a feeling of gratification. That gratification is oftentimes sought out when the person doesn't feel it in other parts of their lives. What do I mean? I mean when the teenage boy feels rejected by his parents or girls. I mean when someone feels trapped in an awful life they are desperate to escape. The person who is treated horribly by their spouse. They will choose dopamine as their coping mechanism, whether it's through escaping by choosing gaming, drugs, or pornography. That instant rush, that always stable thing in their life, makes them feel normal. It's how people cope. Porn is a coping mechanism, but it's also the mechanism for people who feel unloved. People will even choose porn because they're self-flagellating. At first, a teenager might choose porn because he feels this shame that he wishes to escape. Then he grows older and he wants to relearn how to love. And he feels shame after he uses porn, although his brain chemistry is dependent on it. So it becomes this weird backwards thing that once managed shame and now causes it. This is why I feel for men in this position. They oftentimes flock to porn because they felt worthless, and now they are desensitized to the worth of others and don't know how to fix the problem. So why does all this matter? Can't someone just live their life addicted to porn? What's the harm? Well, just as people would have interventions for heroin addicts, there ought to be an intervention for someone who is addicted to porn or desensitized to pornographic images. This, much like drugs, is an unhealthy coping mechanism that, yes, exploits and harms other people. People partaking in such things creates a market for it, which is why it's especially sinful for Catholics to further that market. As I said in my last video about sexual exploitation, oftentimes people who get naked on the screen for your entertainment started out as abused and groomed children, told they were only worth as much as their bodies granted satisfaction. It's wrong to support this cultural narrative that people don't have inherent human dignity, worthy of being defended and loved. So when you partake in the sexual exploitation of someone else, you are acting predatory. And instead of protecting someone else's value, you use their sexuality for your entertainment, which also promotes a lustful society. Not good, Catholics. And it's not enough to say that you don't support certain parts of TV shows or movies, because you're still supporting the media, which generally exploits people. The other thing I want to note about these things is that if someone sees materials that isn't specifically pornographic, but they have an issue with their brain chemistry and addiction, there is something called attention bias, which can be triggered by sexual stimuli, cue reactivity, and craving, which will leave someone who is recovering from porn addiction experiencing genuine withdrawal symptoms. Think of someone who was a smoker for 10 years, seeing a cigarette and having a craving. They might not have a lit smoke in front of their lips, but they've experienced a craving for that substance. So even if an image, such as an advertisement, isn't pornographic but sexually suggestive, it can be enough to make someone in recovery relapse. This is another good reason not to allow yourself to become addicted and start out on that slippery slope. It's very difficult to navigate our world and avoid sexual stimuli. This is another good reason why women ought not put their sexual parts on display to gain attention. It's simply disrespectful. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of pornography in relation to Catholicism. First off, if you are a Catholic man who views pornography, stop. Good Catholic women deserve to be loved. If you're in a marriage, it is adultery. But I say to you, everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. It's cheating. It's abuse. It's a violation of your spouse's natural and marital rights. You are harming them emotionally and psychologically. If you do not seek help for this, you aren't living out your vocation to be a provider and protector, because you're preying on other women at the expense of your wife. You become a predator. I don't understand how any woman can be expected to put up with that. Catholic women who treat their men well also tend to not want to date guys who have porn issues. A friend of mine was bemoaning to me that he finally got to know a great Catholic female, but the time came in their relationship where she had to ask him if he had ever watched porn, which, let's face it, is just not that difficult to avoid. But he was open and honest about his previous struggles, and she didn't want him after that. His dream Catholic girl, gone. I wouldn't choose someone like that either, and that's okay. So men, Realize that you greatly limit yourself in the dating arena if you aren't ardently against sexual exploitation. Women want men who are protectors, and you do the opposite when you participate in predatory behavior and don't fight against pornography. Casual porn usage is not on any Catholic woman's list of dream guy qualities. Women live in a world where we are constantly subconsciously told we aren't enough. We aren't good looking enough. We are only worth as much as our bodies can gain attention. And do you think that a woman in a relationship wants to compete against another woman for your sexual attention? Do you want to make your woman feel loved? Like she's the only woman you want? Then don't want other women. Make her feel like she's the only one you want. If she bears your children, her body changes. A lot. She sacrificed not only her health, but her body to bring your child into the world, and her body will never be the same. She will likely face a whole lot of feelings about this. It's not easy to look in the mirror and see your postpartum body, extra skin, extra weight. It's normal for women to feel unattractive after she sacrificed her body. You know what doesn't help with that? Knowing the father of her children would rather look at other women after she's given so much of herself to him. Knowing that her new body isn't capable of getting your engine revving compared to a woman on a screen. I've had 4 children, and while yes, I'm fit, and I realize I'm not repulsive, and generally people are surprised when they find out that I had 4 pregnancies, my body is still forever changed. A few months ago, I was laying in bed with my husband, and he was looking at my imperfect stomach, and he said, "This is the most beautiful stomach in the world to me, because it's the one that gave me my children." And guess what? I believed him. I believed him because he not only genuinely loves me, but he doesn't make me compete with other women. He's man enough to understand sacrificial love and appreciate it, much like how we will say Jesus Christ on the cross is beautiful. A woman cannot feel loved by a man if he actively lusts after other women. That's just how it is. Men, you need to understand and comprehend this. If a man lusts after other women, it will make her jealous. Yeah, it will. The more jealous a woman, the less emotionally stable she will be, and she won't be happy in her relationship, which makes her not care as much about making her man happy. Was looking at that woman's butt walking by really worth your wife not feeling super great about herself for a while? If a man is a womanizer, he is giving a subconscious cue to the woman in his life that she will never be enough for him. Sexy enough, young enough, fit enough to keep his attention. Catholic men, is this what you want for your wife? She will never feel secure and happy in a relationship if she's constantly subconsciously reminded that she will never measure up. No emotionally healthy woman wants their partner to lust after another woman, emotionally, mentally, or physically. A sexually healthy woman wants to be the only one her husband desires. How is a woman supposed to feel protected around a man if he displays predatory behavior? Womanizing is predatory behavior. Using another human being as a means to an end, ripping away their dignity, is predatory behavior. How is a woman supposed to respect a man who does those things? A good woman would not be able to respect a man like that. She wouldn't be able to. You want your wife to feel happy and secure in your relationship? Stop wanting other women. And I don't mean, oh, don't womanize in front of her. I don't mean, don't let her know when you're watching porn. I mean, you actually relearn how to genuinely love another person. Your ability to love is what will grant you the relationship you want. You cannot fake love. Maybe you're with a woman who says she doesn't mind your lusting or even participates with you in this behavior. Maybe you're with a woman who puts herself on display to receive affirmation from other men. A woman like this is not emotionally healthy. Most likely she, like most women, never experienced truly being loved. And the unfortunate truth is that most women feel like they have to earn being loved, whether it's by saying boys will be boys and keeping their head down, or by trying to earn credentials with their body. Think of strippers or porn stars. Do you think they are super emotionally healthy and grew up in a home with parents who made them feel loved and protected them from sexual abuse? If you show a woman genuine love, it will shock her and it will change her. But the ability to genuinely love has to be retained or relearned, and it's only done through self-sacrifice. Love is a cross. Only the chaste man and the chaste woman are capable of true love. That's JP2. What about how terrifying it would be for other people to find out someone is sexually disordered? It becomes kind of a big deal if someone who is known for being a good Catholic turns out to watch porn. It goes against everything Catholicism stands for, and it's assumed that what you said that was good can't be trusted. You aren't viewed as holy anymore. The baby is thrown out with the bathwater. People cling to your sins too, fixating on other people's sins because that just means that they can say someone else is a worse person than they are. It feeds into our primal need to be better than other people. It's especially unfortunate for a Catholic man, since he's supposed to be a protector of his family, a defender of dignity. If you want people to think you are holy, then be holy. The reality is that the sin of sexual perversion will send you to hell. We know this. It's one thing to be addicted or fall into sin when you're weak, but if you do, you need to get to confession immediately, or you will go to hell. It's one thing to notice that a woman is attractive. It's another to joke about how you wish you could have sex with her, undermining how God views her as his child. You are not holy if you behave that way. Your perversion will send you to hell, even if you don't touch anyone else. Reinforcing that others are not worthy of human dignity is evil. Encouraging others to view others in a sexually perverted way is evil. Go to confession and stop being a pervert. The comforting thing is that we have great saints who experience the same sort of sinful desires that someone who is struggling with lust feels. We have stories of what they did to overcome said desires, throwing themselves on prayer, poverty, and penance. There are several great saints whom you can read about, including St. Catherine of Siena, who gave 3 helpful lessons by her example. St. Catherine advises us to remember God's presence, live austerely, such as fasting from excessive food, and finally, blessings will come after the storm, so be patient. Of course, we have St. Augustine, St. Mary Magdalene, St. Francis of Assisi, and St. Ignatius of Loyola, who fell into a swirling cauldron of lust. God gives us these people as examples to show us there is redemption. But these people also became saints because they threw themselves completely on God, not partly. We must do the same if we wish to overcome a sin. Their relying completely on God to overcome their sins is what made them saints. What are some helpful things you can do when you feel a trigger to want to partake in something lustful? Firstly, recognize what your trigger is. Is it a feeling of worthlessness? Is it when you fight with your spouse? Is it a visual trigger, something as simple as an ad? It's important to figure out what your trigger is so that the root cause of the issue can be identified, healed, and you will be better armed. What's the first thing you do when you are sexually triggered and want to act in a sexually disordered way? Since we know that your brain is wired to start craving certain stimuli in order to give you your dose of dopamine, much like how a former smoker will crave a smoke, it's very difficult to simply ignore these cravings. You need to firstly try to take captive that thought by reminding yourself of the human value of others. Let's talk about coping mechanisms. I find that for myself, for a wide variety of issues, mantras are extremely helpful. There are several great quotes from saints and Bible verses, which you can look up and memorize. One of my favorites is, "Where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more," from Romans. Mantras have helped push me through so much, and they are my go-to. I also love, "Lord, I need thee every hour." Recalling good Christian songs is another way to stop a thought in its tracks. Of course, the ideal thing to accompany these mental exercises are physical ones. Changing your surroundings or what you're currently doing will help out immensely. One friend told me that when he was advised when he wanted to watch porn, he was told to run, not only from the desires, not only to confession, but to get up and run. Physically work out your salvation. Work your body. If you're working out, it's far more difficult to stop and look at porn. Go outside to run, because you can't exactly stop on a street in your neighborhood and whip out your phone. If you are plagued with sudden sexual inclinations, changing your environment is key to changing your current thought patterns. If you cannot work out, grab a book. Walk away from any electronics. I believe Matt Fradd has a book called Delivered, True Stories of Men and Women Who Turned from Porn to Purity. I haven't read it yet, but he seems like a good solid guy, so I'll go ahead and recommend it. I love you, Matt. Holla back. There's, of course, Confessions by St. Augustine and Theology of the Body. Reading has made many saints. If you don't have a book, pick up your phone and call someone. Do not text. no messaging, no Facebook scrolling. Call someone. You can even have an accountability buddy, someone who tells you you can call them whenever you're stuck with these desires, and they can talk you through it. When I would counsel men about this, way back before I was married, I would get these types of phone calls. Hey, it's me. I'm struggling. I don't want to give in. Talk to me. It would be extremely beneficial to have a person of the same sex to call, because women need coping mechanisms too. Offer to be that person to someone who you know could use someone to lean on. Be that light in the darkness to someone, especially if you aren't someone who struggles with sexual sin. Offer to be someone who can be called, because that person will know that you will hold them accountable. Having a religious article on you can also be helpful. Someone said that they couldn't imagine performing a sexual act on themselves while they wore a scapular. If that's what it takes, great. What about a Marian ring? How about an arm or hand tattoo or something religious that you'll see? Having pictures around your home and work area to remind you why you need to be a strong Christian for other people would also be beneficial. Regular fasting is very important for learning to overcome spiritual afflictions. It's training your body so you become master over it. Choosing to suffer for the betterment of your soul is a beautiful thing. When you choose to fast, you are opening yourself up and saying, this is my body given up for you. You're offering your suffering to God. From St. Augustine, fasting cleanses the soul, raises the mind, subjects one's flesh to the spirit, renders the heart contrite and humble, scatters the clouds of concupiscence, and kindles the true light of chastity. And of course, the thing we all know we ought to cling to, prayer. The rosary is a very powerful weapon, which will fill you with grace if ardently prayed. If you can simply drop what you're doing when you start to have disordered thoughts or longings and pray a rosary, do it. Imagine Mary in your mind, how pure and authentically beautiful, and how she wants you to view all others with the same love. If you saw someone coming after Mary, seeking to tear away at her God-given dignity, how would you react? Would you rise to defend her or look the other way? Treat the same woman you wish to lust after the same way you defend Mary. Defend her sacredness, even against yourself. I will compile a document after this episode launches about good resources for people to battle their sexual demons. Follow Faith and Reason Studios on Facebook to be on the lookout for that. I believe that if we urge people to battle, they ought to be well armed. Lastly, stop beating yourself up. We're all sinners. However, this should not be taken lightly at all. If you're desensitized to human suffering and have lost the ability to love, that's a very big issue. If you can no longer be an authentically strong Catholic leader because of how you treat others, seek to fix that. If other people aren't emotionally and mentally safe around you because of how you treat others as sexual objects, for the sake of your own soul, do something. You need to work towards getting back to that place of innocence and purity. No one is perfect, no. But we all need to work out our own salvation. Do not beat yourself up, but do not tell yourself that being sexually disordered is not as bad as it is. Because it is. Because it will send you to hell. You need to take this seriously. If not for your own soul, for the souls of others whom you are entrusted, to build up the church by building up yourself, then your marriage, then your family, then your community. The fact is that the culture of lust and death exists because Catholics have allowed it. You deserve better. Your loved ones deserve better. Other people whom you objectify deserve better. The church deserves better. And he who suffered to offer up his body out of love for the human race deserves better. You are worthy of love. Now rise up and slay your dragons.